afternoon, and welcome to Public Arts and Social Justice. I'm Wendy Smooth, and I will be leading our conversation this afternoon. I thank you for joining us with what promises to be an engaging conversation. This afternoon's program itself is the result of a conversation with our ASC Alumni Society's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee alums who share a commitment to building more inclusive learning spaces in arts and sciences and across the university. My special thanks to committee leader Devika Carr and the DEI committee for their thought partnership for this program. Now, last autumn, as we returned to campus, life, and a bit of normality, we were welcomed by an engaging art installation of murals created by local artists here in Columbus during the summer of 2020, when the Columbus community rose in protest like cities across the nation, demanding accountability, justice, and the painful recognition of the unjust killings of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor at the hands of police. The murals, which we'll learn more about today, made their way to our campus via Arts United at OSU, a partnership between the Greater Columbus Arts Council, university libraries, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, the Office of Outreach and Engagement, and the Wexner Center for the Arts. The murals have spurred tremendous conversations here on campus, among those walking across the Oval or visiting inside Thompson Library, and have been the subject of campus public talks and dialogues such as this. The murals also have been included as a part of some of our dynamic campus courses, which will make you wish you'd been a part of these classes. Today we have Jody Patterson, Professor Jody Patterson, and Professor Jenny Suchland, who brought the murals into their arts and sciences classrooms in innovative ways to explore the myriad of ways that art informs. We also have with us Francesca Miller and April Tsunami, both OSU alums of the College of Arts and Sciences and visual artists who created murals during the protest, giving voice to our community. I want to give you a little bit more detail about these amazing panelists and also share that you can read more about their work at the links that will be provided to you in the chat. I want to start with Francesca Miller, class of 2019, who is an art education alumna who has always made the connections between art, the influential power it wields, and the visceral emotion it elicits. She calls on the experience everywhere she turns, as a visual artist instructor at the Lincoln Theater, or upon joining the #ArtsUnites FEBUS, public arts initiative to create murals, of course, that we'll talk about today during the summer 2020 protest. Her public art has been commissioned by companies like Abercrombie and Fitch, where she designed its For Justice collection. And each piece she describes as a genuine reflection of how her own experiences have shaped the artist she is today. And with every blank canvas she faces, Miller believes it's her duty to continue reflecting on the times in which we live. Next, I want to introduce you to Professor Jody Patterson, who's the inaugural Roy Lichtenstein Foundation Chair of Art History. Her research focuses on 20th century American art, particularly the relations between art and politics. And she's published in edited volumes and exhibition catalogs, such as Art History, Oxford Art Journal, the Tate Papers, and American Art. Her first book, Modernism for the Masses, Painters, Politics, and Public Murals in 1930s New York is published with Yale University Press. And she's currently working on a second manuscript entitled, What About Modern Art and Democracy? Across her works, Patterson explores mural painting and the democratization of culture through public art. Professor Jennifer Suchland, she's my colleague, and I often refer to her affectionately as Jenny, is an interdisciplinary scholar trained in political and feminist theory and area studies, and is jointly appointed through Slavic and East European languages and cultures and women's gender and sexuality studies, my home department. Her research, teaching, and ethical commitments are to a robust study of rights, law, and political discourses as they are culturally and geographically entangled. She is the author of Economies of Violence, Transnational Feminisms, Post-Socialism, and the Politics of Sex Trafficking from Duke University Press, and is involved in a number of collaborations that help us to think through the moniker of modern day slavery and its connection to human trafficking. And finally, we have April Tsunami, an alumna of the College of Arts and Sciences and an award-winning multimedia painter, installation artist, muralist, and arts educator. Her paintings are in the permanent collection of the National African American Museum and the Cultural Center, the Southern Ohio Museum, the Columbus Convention Center, and additionally have been featured at the Columbus Museum of Art and the Akron Art Museum. Tsunami's work has been exhibited internationally, including the 2019 Cuba Biennial Expedition and the National Theater in Accra, Ghana. Today, we encourage you as we move through this engaging conversation to post your questions in the Q&A. If you're like me, you're going to have lots of them. I want to start by speaking with our artists to help us locate ourselves in the moment of the summer of 2020. How did you make the decision to create in the height of the unrest? And can you talk to us a little bit about your process of creating the murals? I'm going to start with April.
Right, unmute myself there. Hello. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to Wendy and to everyone. Thank you for allowing me to be here and to talk. I think in 2020, it was right at I believe it was May, June that the protest happened and the uprising happened, and it was actually kind of the first time I was out of the house at that moment, and it definitely felt urgent, I think, for everybody to do something. And I guess I feel like my role in the social justice ecosystem is to do what I do, which is to create art. So that's exactly what I did. So I answered that call to create work. And when I did it, I honestly had no, I was really just trying to search for meaning in this moment, you know. So I think for a lot of artists, including myself, you know, we look through our different quotes, you know. So the first piece I created, I used the Ella Baker quote just to help kind of frame the moment and put it into context for me to create. So yeah, so I think just out of a personal and collective need to do something, that was it. That's just how, you know, art is how I walk in the world, and that's, yeah. So that was it.
Thank you. Francesca, can you share a little bit about your decision to create in the height of the unrest?
Absolutely. I would like to also just chime in really quickly and say thank you for having me here today. It's an honor to be able to come and connect with my old school and just talk about this really important topic. So thank you again. And I agree with April. I definitely believe that we all felt that urgency. This was different than any other time. First off, we've known about the oppression and just all the terrible things that have been done against us, right? And we've seen videos and everything over the years, but this time, like she said, it's like we were just tired, just like, no, we can't just let this be another thing where we throw up hashtags, think just globally, we were like, change is now. And obviously with that, there's all types of emotions. You have people who are angry and full of rage and all of that, and just ready to destroy everything in their path. And then you have those of us who are like, okay, we have to come together collectively, and it can seem kind of chaotic. And so for me, I felt a couple of things, but mainly I felt like, okay, this is my opportunity to use my gift and my art as a way to bring healing. A mentor of mine made a great statement saying that art sort of balances the energy. And so what I tell people often is, well, we can get into the actual painting of the murals in a second, but I'll say like what led me to be out there is like, this is a great opportunity, like I said, to just bring healing to us, and to bring healing to the way in which we're depicted. And so I remember my first thought in response to seeing everything about George Floyd was, I think I even made it a status, like, we should just paint Black men everywhere, all over the city. It was just one of those things of like, man, like we're not even doing anything but existing, and this narrative of us is implanted in people's minds to where we're losing our lives for no reason, and so I wanted to use my art to depict us as human beings, who are dignified, who are not a threat, who are just the side that's not commonly pushed out there as far as the narrative for Black people. And so, yes, that is what urged me to be out there during that protest time.
And you all were there at the very heart of the moment of protest. So can you talk a little bit about, or were you surprised by the connections the community made, like almost immediately, to the murals as they were going up? There was this energy around you as you were creating. Were you surprised by that response? Francesca?
Okay, thank you. No, I will say that I was not surprised because of the fact that, well, I should say this. Before getting started with the murals during the protest, I had only had 3 muraling experiences prior. That's not very many at all, but even working on those projects, I noticed like, wow, people really are drawn to public art. You're probably not going to find it where nobody says anything. So I wasn't surprised at the fact that people responded. But it was interesting how like they were kind of on opposite ends of the spectrums. You had some people who were very excited and very, just all for it, were appreciative. Some even coming up to us with tears in their eyes, thanking us for doing it. And then you had others who were like, why are y'all doing that? And then you had those who were actually out on the street. I know me and a couple of friends had some experiences where people were like throwing stuff at us. It was like really problematic for them. And even then, I should say that shouldn't surprise me because art has always been controversial, right? It's always kind of like unearthed how we really feel at the core. So yeah, I would say that I'm not surprised at all at how people responded.
Thank you. April.
Yeah, I didn't quite, I will say, when I think the first mural that I did that summer, it was at the Ohio Theater. And I think for me, what was, I won't necessarily say surprised, but I'll say that I felt a little ambivalent. And this is why. I think there were many people who were actually working downtown and they came up to me and said, thank you for doing this. And it wasn't necessarily for the people who work downtown, kind of to go back to what Francesca said, this is really healing for us in the community, those who are who are really feeling the effects of this oppression, this system, And so it definitely made me feel ambivalent. And I remember a really good friend of mine had posed the question of like, why don't we all just sit with the boarded up windows and let people think about, what does that mean? What is it? Why even beautiful, like not necessarily to beautify, but, artists are being sort of used to cover up this is what happened. This is the result. And so I don't ever regret my role in painting what I did, but it definitely made me think about, again, when you have public art, it bears into question. It's accessible to everybody, but also who is it for? And so, so that question definitely, it came up. It came up for me. And while I'm ever polite, I never told anybody passing by like, no, this is not for you. Well, I didn't go there and I didn't say that. I definitely felt a certain kind of way.
Mm-hmm. Can you all talk about this kind of balancing of, and April, you're starting to take us there in terms of a kind of balancing of both notions of joy, that your art brought smiles and giddiness. At least in my family, it was pure giddiness to see you all creating in real time. But also this kind of mixed space of both incredible Black joy at seeing these artists at work, but also this kind of incredible Black pain kind of coexisting in this space, and the ways in which the murals come to reflect that coexistence. April or Francesca?
Yeah, I mean, I can start off first. I mean, I think for me, the function that art plays for me, and my ultimate hope, is that the people who connect with it kind of get kind of what Francesca was saying, just sort of the healing from it. I would say the main animus behind my work is representation in history, and ultimately, this all I paint are Black women. So, ultimately put these subjects that I love and I care about so deeply and see myself in public spaces, it brings me joy, and I hope that it brings other people joy. And I'm with you. I definitely believe that in order to keep myself sane in that moment, because I felt so many things. I had to repeat to myself, joy is a form of resistance. Your joy is a form of resistance. So it did become a bit of a mantra for me. And that was really that was a form of, what do you say? Self-care.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Did you want me to go ahead or?
Yeah.
Okay. I was just gonna piggyback straight off of April and say, like, I agree entirely with everything you said, especially that last part of the self-care thing, because just really quick, I'll share, like, for me, I discovered art as a form of power and like a weapon for myself at a very early age. Because when I was younger, I dealt with just a lot of like heavy things, very lonely, very like depression and things like that. And initially it would show up in my artwork. But then I realized that as I created that, I felt more of that, like it pulled me in that direction. And so I just had the grand idea one day to like, maybe I should try to paint or draw something that will make me feel what I want to feel. And then from there, I just realized the power in like kind of creating your reality with your work kind of thing. So as I would draw like images of freedom and joy and things like that, I would really like gravitate towards that feeling. And so I saw this as like a perfect opportunity to just keep on using what I've learned with my own art for the sake of everybody around me. But to speak specifically to your point of like that coexisting of the joy and the pain, I think it sends a message to all of us that even in the midst of this pain and frustration, that our joy can exist here with us, and like April said, joy is a form of resistance. And I love that I started to see that phrase, because I remember years ago, me and some friends who are also artists were talking, and we were saying how we feel like often the only part of our story that's told is trauma, and the pain and the oppression. And that's so necessary. Like, yes, don't ever let that die out. Let it be told what happened to us, how we overcame and what is still going on. But at the same time, there's more to our story than just that, and that's a message for everybody in general, but especially for us, because sometimes you can find your identity in the pain and the trauma, and so I know even like with me, that's what I didn't want. Like, yes, my art was for everybody. It was to depict us, like I said, in our humanity and dignity and things like that, for those who are not of our community. But I would say most importantly, it was geared towards those who do look like me. Like, hey, joy is yours. It does belong to you. Like, yes, we're constantly, faced with this just really devastating reality of like our lives not mattering to people, the challenges that we face. But even in the midst of that, like, nobody can take our joy from us. We can't control what's going on around us at the end of the day. We can continue to put forth efforts to, bring forth change and all that, obviously. But what we can control right now in this moment is how we're feeling on the inside. And so, yes, that's my response to that question.
Thank you. Thank you. April, you brought some images to share with us. Let's go ahead and take a look at the images that you want to share with us today. You want to talk us through them? So this first one, we have the WeWho.
April, you're on mute.
Oh, is that what's going on? I can't see.
She's on mute.
I'm so sorry. I went ahead. I started talking about the slides. So sorry. So yeah, this is the first painting that I did downtown in 2020, that summer. And I actually had absolutely no idea what I was going to do. I just got there, started off with a face, and everything kind of, I freestyled it. Everything kind of came with it. But this quote, just actually kind of looking through just sayings and quotes and looking back through history and looking towards people that I admire, particularly Black women. There was this beautiful quote from Ella Baker that I loved and wanted to utilize. So I'll keep, we'll go to the next one. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this one, again, the everything in my art revolves around Black women. And so, at this moment, we focused on a lot of people, but we still had to make sure that Breonna Taylor and all of the other women who were murdered got their recognition, and we continue to say their names. So this quote by Toni Morrison, it speaks to me so much. And I feel this way with every single subject. I feel this way with every single beloved member of my community that looks like me. Beloved, you are my daughter, you are my face, you are me. And I carry that with me in every piece. So you can't see it very well here, but the background is composed of mirrors. And so again, just to kind of hint to this, so the viewers can see themselves in this. And also, I would also like to say this is that this work is it is about Black women, but it is for everyone as well. So, all right, I'll go to the next slide. This is a piece I did at my old studio, and I love this quote. And I will actually see if I can tag it. I cannot pronounce her name correctly, but she is an activist, an Indigenous rights activist in Australia. And she has this quote, "Your liberation," this is an abbreviated part of her quote, but "your liberation is bound up in mine." Just that note that we are all inextricably connected. And I think that's the main thing that we want people to walk away from, is that this struggle is not just Black people's struggle. This is a struggle for everybody's humanity, to see that my life matters, Black women's lives matter, Black lives matter. It's about all of us. So let's go to the next slide. I don't know why I put this in, but it's a sun. And I always use this imagery in my work to just connote a new day. It always represents hope. And I'll hit the next slide. This is a piece. It's not necessarily a piece for the, this is a piece I did in the summer of 2020, but it is not connected to the protest. This is actually in the, it was actually in my neighborhood, the King Lincoln Brownsville neighborhood. Again, my hope with my work is to put Black women everywhere in places of privileges, such as museums, galleries, but also in accessible places. So also brings up space and who has access to these spaces, right? And then the next slide. And so this was actually a mural also completed that summer. Yeah, this is very clear. Black women matter. This is this is good. It's pretty self-explanatory, I guess. So that's it.
Thank you so much, because those give us a real touch point to think about. You know, this next phase of discussion that we want to do is to talk about how these murals landed in course discussions. And Jenny and Jody, how did you include the art installation into your courses? We were pivoting back in all sorts of ways, and then we got this announcement of this amazing resource. But how did you make the decision to include the art installation? And then how did your students in your courses engage with the murals? I'm going to start us off, Jenny.
Sorry, had to unmute myself, but also want to reiterate my gratitude to Wendy for inviting me to this conversation today, and also my gratitude to April and Francesca, because I really, really just appreciate hearing from you as the artist of these murals, and it's really just wonderful to see the artist and to hear the artist's voice, and to not have that be disembodied from the work that's in the community. So this is really the missing link in many ways to the ways that my students engaged, the installation on campus. But I've learned so much about public art from my colleague in WGSS, Dr. Cristela Latorre, and her work and expertise is on street art and what she calls visual democracy. And she talks about this in 2 books that she's done, and most recently in the context of post-dictatorship Chile. So my engagement with the installation is not focused on aesthetics, visual art practices, or the incorporation of street art into histories of art. Rather, the students visited the installation as part of a sustained conversation we had in my feminist methods class about the politics of location. And so the politics of location refers to the idea that any practice of learning, researching, and making is situated within relations of power. And the context in which we learn and work are deeply informed by the politics of location, even though they may not often be reflected upon or acknowledged, leading to profound biases and the perpetuation of systems of power, privilege, and domination. So the feminist studies, feminist method students explored and critically reflected upon our collective and individually unique relations to the histories, legacies, and current manifestations and repercussions of white settler colonialism, anti-Blackness, and heteropatriarchy. The Art Unites Columbus installation materialized the Black Lives Matter protest in Columbus in that summer of 2020, breaking down the idea that the university is tucked away from or neutral towards the local struggles against police brutality, racist policing practices, or the Black and racialized communities most impacted by those practices. For the students, especially students of color, this was not a revelation. But at the same time, the installation did raise several questions which they articulated in a writing assignment. And so I wanted to just share with you some of the questions that the students themselves articulated in response to the installation. One student asks, how can an installation like this encourage onlookers to engage with local struggles against police brutality, including local organizations that aren't associated with the George Floyd or the national names that we are more familiar with, but local names and organizations. And from that, the student researched several organizations that are here in Columbus, including the Ohio Families Unite Against Police Brutality, People's Justice Project, and the Juvenile Justice Coalition, among others. So I thought that was a really insightful question. Another student asked, does the repackaging of art diffuse, like moving it from its site, its location, to bringing it to campus, is how I understood that. Does it diffuse the social protest that initiated the art to begin with? Including the potentially problematic ways that some city and community members prioritize the value of property over human life. And then another question, I'll leave it at one more question. They had so many. What is the relationship between authorized and unauthorized public art? And what connections are there between street art and challenges to the official memorialization of institutions, such as with the combined controversies and around the Columbus statue here in Columbus, Ohio? So, I think that through this, analysis of politics of location, the students engaged your work by sort of positioning themselves at Ohio State University in Columbus. And you also inspire them to think critically about these other kinds of questions that I think are still unanswered and ongoing. So I thank you so much for allowing that, for facilitating that.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Jody, your work overall takes up these questions. How did you engage this in the classroom, this past autumn semester with the presence of this amazing installation on campus?
Well, firstly, just to reiterate everyone's thanks for the generosity of this opportunity and to have the conversation. I think it's so important that we hear artists' voices, and my position as an art historian, sort of akin to Professor Suchland, is that looking at politics and looking at questions of access. And I have a very brief PowerPoint to share. In part, this may be gratifying to April and Francesca, because there's a lot of joy involved in what the students went out and did. So I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay, so my research already looks at public art, murals, questions of social justice and politics, but in the context of the course that I brought the murals into, this isn't something that you would normally find. So public art is a tool for communication. It can raise awareness about social issues, foster a sense of collective action within marginalized communities, and in the best possible instances, affect positive change. So within the discipline of art history, though public art has a long history, from ancient paintings on cave walls and frescoes in cathedrals, the canon, that sort of great standard of art history, is selective, and artworks by white heterosexual men still tend to serve as normative. And I started off part of this discussion by looking at, we sort of made some interventions. So this is in a course, our big GE course, first year students, some in other years, but we may never ever get to speak to them about art again. So within this course, one of our interventions was to explore the work of African-American artists who are, have not been represented, such as Jacob Lords, who we're looking at here, and Romare Bearden, and there's a Romare Bearden. So these artists, like the people involved with Black Lives Matter murals, looked closely at the world around them, and they focused on different subjects like the Great Migration or these amazingly vibrant communities such as that in Harlem. And these artists sought representation of their experiences. They knew that Black lives mattered, even if they weren't always included in the history books. And so we actually talked about why this would be the case. And this is just a particularly startling, although, not unexpected survey of museum collections that has just been done across the United States. 15% artists of color, 1.2% by Black people. So art is beautiful in all of its many forms. And this idea of joy and beauty is certainly important, but it's also political. Mm-hmm. And the installation of the Art Unites Columbus murals offered an opportunity, amongst other things, to demonstrate to students that art is here and it's now and it's vital and it's alive. It can teach us things and bring us joy. So each student, as you can see, was encouraged to go out, look at these murals, choose one, and then write a response paper. And their responses, of course, included visual analysis, linking our colors and lines and choices and texts to styles that we covered in class. And their papers consistently observed how the murals communicated expressions of anger and grief, as have been mentioned, but also of hope. And I'll just show you a couple more here. And they were asked to think about more generally, had they already been aware of racial biases in art and its histories? And what types of histories were these biases preserving? And what action could and should be taken for the future? And their responses overwhelmingly generated ideas around public art with its accessibility, its vibrancy, was able to foster within them and their own experience a sense of accountability and hopes for reform. And much of that came from the fact that a number of students had no idea why the murals were on campus. Some of them thought they were advertisements and didn't understand the whole context. So hopefully some of them are here listening today, not only to celebrate their own photographs, to celebrate the murals, but to hear the artists' voices, and that art is everywhere and it is political and it can bring joy, and it's a tool of communication. So I think that was some of the main goals within the assessment.
Thank you so much, Jody. And for someone who's trained as a political scientist, to be reminded of, that this is a political space of creation. And this idea of race and racialization processes makes us all remember that claiming joy is a political act as much as it is self-care, as much as it is celebratory, which we've definitely been talking through today. Thank you so much. These, as I said, these are classes. I did not realize, Jody, it was a general education course as well. So talk about the numbers of students that had an opportunity to engage in this important conversation. Now, a lot of us have had a lot of angst about like the future of the murals, right? And I want to remind everyone to please drop your questions into the Q&A, and so that we can make sure that we are engaging with the questions from the audience. And we're going to break in just a moment to turn to those. A lot of us have had a lot of conversations about, the future of the murals, or thinking about, what should be the future of the murals. Some are looking at ways such as Art Unites Columbus has created a website where you can see the over 200 different murals through website depictions. There's talk, I hear, of a book to commemorate the murals. But how might we explore preservation in such a way? And I think, Jenny, one of the questions that your students ask really invites us to think about preservation that does not move us away from the politicized moment in which the works were first created. As panelists, what thoughts do you have about how we might preserve the work? Or as street art or public art, do we have to understand it as existing for but a moment? And then we make space for additional engagements with new conversations. Just want to get folks' perspectives there. Jody, would you kick us off?
My first thought about this, visibility is power. So, bringing something into representation, I think is a key priority for change. So I would, whether it's these murals or other murals that take their place, making walls available for people to express their histories, their identities, their hopes for the future. I'm going to have to cough now, so I'm going to step aside for a minute.
Thank you, Jody. Thank you. April and Francesca, what are your thoughts about this idea of how we preserve, hold on to, maybe let go of? Where's the space that we operate? Francesca?
Yeah, sure. I'll go first. That's a great question. I think that first off, like those efforts to preserve so that we can like actually go back and look on them are great. Like you mentioned so far, the website, there's been a lot of different ways that the murals have just been documented, photographs, digital versions, and just reproducing, like obviously is a very obvious way to kind of just preserve the images. But also I do believe there is that acceptance, like you mentioned, of the fact that it's not guaranteed that these public arts will be there forever, right? And so I think that you will most commonly see the preservation living in those who are impacted by the art, the things that come as a result of somebody taking the time to listen to the message that's being amplified through the public art, the change that it actually causes. I think that the preservation lives on, like I said, through the impact that is made. That is my response.
I think Fran is absolutely right there. I think in order for memories to live on, in order for a legacy to continue, there has to be some personal work behind it, right? Or some collective work behind it. I was thinking about, I'm sorry, I'm gonna put you on the spot here, Fran, but Fran, she is a Walt Mill Mural League ambassador, which is really interesting. So Walt Mill was a really well-known muralist here, and I would probably venture to say that most of his works are gone just due to gentrification, buildings being torn down, what have you. But the name lives on just due to the efforts of Francesca and some other really motivated individuals to keep that memory alive. But from my personal standpoint, I definitely feel like there is this acceptance that street art in general is ephemeral, and the only way you keep it alive is by impact, just like Francesca mentioned.
So Francesca and April, what do you think about this idea that students were engaging with your work and the way in which they were engaging, both in terms of thinking about the location of Columbus, but also locating your murals in this powerful historical tradition of African-American artists like Jacob Lawrence?
Well, first of all, let me say that I'm super impressed. And honestly, if I had Jody Patterson in her survey class as an art history student at Ohio State, my trajectory might be completely different. This is the whole reason why I paint Black women, is to insert us in the canon, in the Western canon. And again, had I had that, you know, oh gosh, I don't know how many, 20 years ago, yeah, my life would be completely different. Also, I think for Jennifer, the questions that your students raised were incredible. I just want to say, like, the question about, does relocating the work, does it diffuse its meaning? Does it diffuse its context? And that's such a great question. And I don't have an answer to, but I definitely feel that it creates this new meaning. It was really interesting to see students in front of the work, taking their pictures of the work. And that kind of also brings up another question and kind of harkens back to the previous question about how do you preserve art? And I feel like with public art, we're kind of at this moment right now with social media that anybody can insert this art, this public art, in their story, and it lives on forever in the cloud or wherever this information is stored, right? So so I think that's it raises this really interesting point, but the meaning and the context does change as it gets reposted, as it goes into different locations. The only reason that the immediacy and the urgency, it stays important, it stays relevant to the you know, at the moment of when it was made, is due to the efforts of other people, making sure that they keep this in context and explain this, you know, these sets of circumstances is what precipitated this art making, this creation. So yeah.
Francesca?
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you said, April, especially that last part, because I actually was going to expand upon the previous question to just say, like, even what is being done in the classroom, like that conversation, engaging students in seeing the art, that's like another extremely impactful way to preserve what the mission, you know, is behind public art. And so again, I want to thank you guys as well. And I too was very impressed by the questions, you know, that they were posed. When you were reading them off, I was like, oh, dang, like that's a great question, you know, something to really think about. And I think it's funny because sometimes it is assumed that we as the artists know the answer. And it's like, I'm a part of the audience with you at times, you know, I'm a part of this experience as well. Like, yes, I see myself as a vessel, being used as a vessel to create art. And it's like, yes, I'm the vessel through which this is coming. But like I said, I'm a part of receiving and hearing the message along with you in a lot of ways. But I would say, in response to, and sorry if you hear children in my background, in response to the question of like the relocating thing, I guess I would just piggyback on April as well. Like, no, it doesn't. I don't think that it loses the message or the political power. I think that it adds to it in some ways. And yeah, it really creates space for, it really just creates space for those conversations to just be continued. And yeah, also like just through those conversations being continued on in these institutional spaces and amongst one another in the community, that is how, again, that the message is just carried on throughout, outliving the actual art itself.
Great. I'm going to turn to some of the questions that we are seeing from our audience, and please do continue to place questions in the Q&A. So one is a comment that says, a book paired with reflections would be an amazing teaching tool and a way to preserve this time in history. So I want our panelists maybe to think about, particularly for Jody and Jenny, do you have plans to continue to use the murals in your classes? And if so, what kind of advice would you give to others who might be interested in doing the same?
Go ahead, Jody.
I'll talk for a moment. And again, excuse me if I start coughing. So I think especially in a class where you start off with, you know, these names that are familiar to many, like, you know, Michelangelo and Leonardo and all of that sort of thing. And then to move into our own communities. So when I first came to Columbus, I was so delighted to see the mural paintings in the Short North, realizing like there's a riff on an Aaron Douglas mural, and being able to take students to go and see that. So I will continue to, you know, in small classes, take students out, in large classes, have them go and look, because there's a message about who makes art, who has access to art, what is an artwork. Not everyone feels enfranchised to go into a museum. And April made a great comment that it would be so wonderful to see Black lives mattering and being represented and visible across all of these different contexts. But the fact that we can walk outside and they're part of our everyday experience, they're part of our lives, and we can encounter them in different situations, with different questions, with different ideas. I think that is incredibly important to the antidote of just looking at these things in a past, but keeping art and history alive through looking at right now.
Thank you.
You know, I think that I would definitely, you know, I definitely want to continue to think about incorporating, you know, depending on what happens with this installation, if it's permanent. I'm not sure if it's permanent on campus, but I think what I would do differently, certainly after this conversation and after obviously also meeting in person, virtual person, April and Francesca, is I think that in this assignment of like the politics of location, there was a lot of focus on, you know, really digging deeper into the relationship between the university and the community, and in thinking about the local Black lives that matter, and not, you know, that to situate ourselves, even if we're not from Ohio, we're not from Columbus, but we are here right now. And what kind of responsibility and commitment do we need to show to our local communities, in which some of us are part of and others are not. But I would actually add a whole nother layer. And so I would spend more time, and I would want to actually include more of, well, let's actually talk more about the artists themselves and the way that they're connected in their communities, and also thinking about what the repercussions of the art have been, or the larger social protests. And so, you know, I'm only familiar with some of the things that came as a result of those protests, including the city stating that that racism is a public health crisis. There was some movement towards evaluating the city budgets regarding the police department. You know, there's been agitation for you know, policies, you know, to get rid of qualified immunity, right? To actually dig deeper into this, you know, the art is representing something that's rich, but there's also real people involved in the making of that art. And so I think both of those directions would be really great to add to future engagements with your work.
Thank you. Let's take a question from Michael here, who asked us which artists and musicians, both powerful voices of conveying protests and social injustice, which heavily influence your work, heavily influence you? Let's start with April.
Yeah, mute myself. So just in general, I keep a running list of about 50 of my favorite visual artists, and I update it regularly because I'm a nerd. But but
that's the best kind to be.
Yeah, but I would have to say in this context, I think like the major players from the Black arts movement, where they heavily influenced me. So Elizabeth Catlett, Emory Douglas, those people who knew that the power of art, and art as a political tool, really made me think about, they, you know, were really influential for you know, what I'm doing with the mural work, for sure. Also wanted to just kind of add this. I love the fact that we're also talking about art is political. Art is never just art, right? And I just wanted to put that out there. I had heard a conversation with a friend of mine who saw a mural go up across the street from her, and she said, "What is the fuss? It's just art." And I'm like, it's never just art. This is how people, I'm sorry, I'm going off on a tangent here, but this is how people locate their identity. This is how they share their identity to themselves and to the outside world. So it is important. It's never just art. And so those artists from the Black arts movement understood that art is never just art.
Francesca, I'm going to ask you for a couple of names. We're almost just at time, but I do want to make sure that we get a sense of your influences.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will share that Nina Simone, just her mindset when it came to art, like her expression that an artist's duty is to reflect the times in which they live. I remember coming across that interview that she was having and her saying that, and it just like kind of hit me in the chest, kind of thing. And so, yes, I would say that she's definitely one who inspired me. And honestly, for the most part, a lot of my inspiration comes from those who are actually still living right now, and some of which are even locals here in the city of Columbus. I would say my biggest source of inspiration is probably Richard Dwight Brown, an artist that many of us know and dearly love, just because I feel like we are kindred spirits as far as the purpose that we feel like our art serves. And I know, like, I met him when I was 14, and he just took a quick scan of my sketchbook and was like, immediately just identified, a kin spirit, and just that knowing that it's our role to bring healing. And even if it's just like storytelling, just still telling our story, and the story of those that we know who look like us through a lens of like healing. And so also Bisa Butler, just love her work. And yeah, those are like my biggest ones right now to mention. I want to be honorable at the time.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our panelists and our amazing audience. There are additional questions that we didn't get to, but it just means that the conversation has to continue. Please make sure you're watching for courses in the College of Arts and Sciences that are dealing with these questions of the moment. Arts and Sciences offers us this incredible opportunity to explore our world in multidimensional ways. And so I'm so happy to welcome back to campus our two alums, April and Francesca, and thank our faculty for your willingness to engage the local context and to place it into the broader context that protest history is American history, that protest is a part of who we are, and that the conversations around social justice and healing must continue both inside of classrooms and outside of classrooms. Thank you to all of the organizers of today's event, and we welcome you back to another conversation at another point in time. Have a great evening. Thank you.